the 2015 January half block course team. They're going to introduce each of themselves, give you a little bit of background, but for you to understand the diversity of the class, we have physics majors who are getting ready to graduate this year. We have freshmen coming into this program with the anticipation that maybe they'll go into chemistry, math, or even physics or engineering coursework. And then we also have some team members in the sophomore and junior year ranks, some deciding what their majors are, and some already know that they're physics majors or very interested in engineering. So pretty broad perspective from the class. I'd like us to role play as much as possible during the first phase. I expect about an hour for the presentation. And then after that, I'd like us to caucus and then come back and give them some candid feedback on their performance. Any questions from the audience? I think we have one audience member waiting to return. So if you guys could just take 1 second for Steve to come back, and we'll start. Thank you.
Oh, there he is.
All right, team, over to you guys.
Technical difficulties.
Morning, we are Kerbal Space Industries, and we'll be today presenting the Green Clean Satellite System for Green Gas Scope. We're really hoping you'll like our idea. We'd appreciate any questions. We have some documents in front of you. We'll have the full agenda, our requirements for both initial operational capability and final operational capability. In addition to that, we have our deliverables, what we'll be giving you in our system. And also we have a price and budget table for you to look at the very end. Also, a couple of paragraphs are what we were given as requirements from your company. So we'll go through those in a couple slides. In addition, the large sheet you have is the full schedule, including all different milestones in our company and external milestones. So we hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am Michael Lavallee. I'm part of the launch segment. I'm the director of launch operations. So any questions you have about our launch vehicle or orbits, please direct towards me. Thank you.
My name is Max Margolin. I'm a sophomore here at CC. My major is in nuclear. I'm the chief launch engineer of the launch. So.
I'm Nathan Castillo. I'm the project manager.
My name is Nick Hall. I'm also part of the space segment, and I'm director of satellite construction.
My name is Jared Kong, and I was the chief satellite engineer on this project.
My name is Armand Dominguez, and I'm the chief operations manager.
My name is Jacqueline Xu. I am director of ground operations.
All right. To start things off for you guys, we wanted to talk about our past heritage and who we are as a company and what we've done. So past projects, we started as an airline construction, and that's what we did for early years in our career. We progressed into satellite construction, which is where we're at today. And along the way, we've completed 4 successful manned trips to the moon. Some business reference, we are good partners with Boeing and Lockheed Martin. We've done a lot of business with them, and we feel confident you can refer to them to question our integrity if you need to, and they will give our outstanding reference. Okay, and as we printed out for you in your packet, we have an agenda. This is the schedule we're going to try and follow today in our presentation. It should take about an hour long, give or take a few minutes here.
So I want to give you guys a quick overview of what our mission will eventually do. So our proposed mission will have an array of satellites that will effectively and efficiently monitor well flares over North America initially and potentially the world. So we start out with an array of nanosatellites. These are cheap, but they're very quick. So they're not the most reliable satellites we have, but they'll be up within 12 months, and we'll have enough data from these to run the Payload Operations Center with real-time data for the showcase in 12 months. Once we've proven this theory, we'll put up the next phase. We'll put up a geosynchronous satellite. This will have military-grade technology monitoring North America and potentially South America too, the well flares there. And we'll also have communication capabilities built into the geosync satellite, and that will reduce your comms costs by 75% between North and South America. working in tangent with the geosynchronous satellite, we have the low Earth orbit satellite. We'll have a custom payload built into that will accurately monitor, more accurately monitor well flares, especially in the northern regions. And that will help calibrate the precision of the geosync satellite. These will all communicate through custom ground terminals stationed strategically around the world. That will give us uninterrupted contact with these satellites, as well as our own time frame that we can work on. Those ground terminals, as well as the Mission Operations Center in Colorado Springs and the Payload Operations Center in London, will all communicate through commercial optic fibers. So,
I have a quick question.
Sure.
You're talking about commercial links. Are those exposed to other people getting that data, or is that going to be encrypted so we can use it uniquely in our company?
well, that's up to you guys, I suppose. We can definitely encrypt it and make sure everything's working on its own, in our own realm. But I suspect you guys will be using this, or publishing this data, so it's not highly sensitive information, I don't think, but if you'd like to keep it a secret, we can definitely work with that and make it private data.
So to keep risks and costs down, we split the project into two phases. Initial operational capability, IOC, and final operational capability. IOC will give us the ability to communicate between all Green Gas Co's facilities in North America and South America. Give us 24/7 persistent observation of all the well sites in that realm. And also be able to distinguish the difference between well flares that are 10 miles and greater in distance apart. As part of IOC, we're also going to prepare for the showcase in 12 months. That'll be January 15th in 2016. And for that, we have some satellites we're going to put up, as Nick mentioned, as well as a payload facility center in London. FOC is an option that you guys can exercise to increase coverage of the IOC system to the entire world.
You mentioned there 24/7 observation North America. What is your refresh rate, revisit rate with those LEO microstats, nanostats?
Every 90 minutes is about how often they will go over North America, or a particular site. They have 60 seconds, or 68 seconds, I think, of observation time of a particular spot.
And you're stating there that you're only going to be able to distinguish well flares that are separated by 10 miles or greater. There's a lot of wells in the United States that are much closer than that together. Does that imply that you won't be able to distinguish who is releasing on a particular well site if the sites are closer than 10 miles?
That is correct. The majority of Green Gas Co's well flares are 10 miles and greater in the Gulf of Mexico and off the shore of Alaska. And for the other wells, there are some that are closer. We won't be able to distinguish between individual well flares. We'll still be able to see a flare.
I assume that onshore well fires are probably going to be observable by someone walking by anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
That is your IOC, right? So when you go into your FOC configuration, I'm assuming you'll be able to improve that 10-mile?
Yeah, we can. We can upgrade the sensor capabilities if we need to.
With this custom sensor, will you be meeting the requirements that we gave you?
Well, the custom sensor will meet all the requirements that Green Gas Co provided.
Okay. Should we push those requirements further and develop a system that's more capable to distinguish closer well flares, or do you think this is the right capability?
Well, IOC is kind of geared towards visualizing Green Gas Co's assets.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys want to extend that to coverage over other companies or use the data for outside sources, then maybe that would be an option. But I think the most important thing is to get your guys' assets properly viewed.
So regulate Star Wars.
Yes, this is proof of concept in your IOC, which you're saying, right?
Yeah, it'll have full capabilities for your system, for your sites.
I think that's good for our company.
Yeah.
If we're already working to eliminate this problem, do you find any sort of hesitancy in starting with our assets.
I think starting with your assets is a good start, and you guys shouldn't have any issues because of the work you've previously put into your systems. So hopefully that'll inspire or spur other people to kind of push for their own systems.
If I understood from our midterm review, the LEO asset should give the entire globe access to their assets and other companies' assets, but our persistent satellite should give green gas an advantage in the market, is that correct?
Your persistent satellite will be a GEO. It'll give you 24/7 observation of everything in North and South America. It also provide comms to well flares, or your well sites.
So I think from what I understood from Ms. Biggins was she wanted us to control North and South America assets because that's where our primary business is. And I think the regulators will understand that the LEO asset can be used to regulate the rest of the companies, but eventually they'll have to go to FOC capability. I think we'll stand up a wholly owned subsidiary for that and start a business in the next 5 years following the original regulation.
As implied in the chart, we use the cost risk as the first criteria to narrow down the numerous choices we had. After comparison of other aspects of each individual rocket, including performance risk, geopolitical risk, and location access, and sensitivity analysis, which our chief launch engineer Max would like to explain in detail, Falcon 9 appeared to have the highest overall quality, and therefore was chosen as our rocket.
As Jacqueline mentioned, here we have our trade progress that Michael and I worked through. We're given a large list of rockets that we're available to use for our launch, and we use the cost risk to slim that down into a more suitable selection. We figured that these values were going to be as true as we could get. The other ones were a little bit vague. We weren't sure what we were going to be getting. So that was the initial filter to get these 5. In the purple, we have our single stage rockets that will carry less weight into a lower orbit. In the blue, we have double stage. They'll carry a lot more the payload capacity, and it'll go higher into orbit. We have our performance risk. We did a little research on these rockets, and their success rate and everything out of the different launch locations. We also considered geopolitical risk. Where are these rockets coming from? Will there be any confrontation with other relations we have with the countries where their origin, where they're created? And the Falcon 9 was a hit because that is actually manufactured in California, which is in the United States, obviously. And then we also want to consider our location access. How much trouble will we have getting the rocket to our launch location, which we decided will most likely be out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. So across the board, we got our final statistics, and we decided that the Falcon 9 would be best suitable for you guys.
So your numbers there, like under performance risk, the bigger is better, or?
Yes, the bigger is better on all of the sections in this chart.
Question here, how far along are you in scheduling the launch site for these particular launches within this year?
We have the launch site actually decided on. We're gonna.
Has it been, has the slot been allocated for this launch within this year?
We've been in communications, but we have not fully allocated the launch today, depending on weather and other circumstances.
It's also true that within the year, we're trying to deploy the nano satellites, and those we're piggybacking on top of trips up to the International Space Station. So those, they'll let us on if they have room, but if something happens, there's a scheduling risk for that.
How is your process with getting along with NASA's requirements for putting payloads with an ammunition?
I believe our NanoRack system, the company that brings it up on the NASA craft, we'll pay them and they'll make sure our stuff gets up there and is put into orbit from the ISS in a proper manner.
So there's a history of getting these on board with the
That's
ISS.
right, with NanoRacks.
Japanese dump nanosets all the time out of their modules. And The Air Force hates it.
What's that?
Sounds like you guys did a really good job of researching the launch options, so thank you for the clear understanding.
Users were having some technical difficulties right now.
Because this is a full.
Hold on, these we're having some technical difficulties, yeah?
All is well.
Oh, you're presenting out of Google Docs, are you?
We have a special version of Google Docs for each project.
Ah,
Very good.
I apologize.
Very good.
You've learned the key lesson of presentation. Things will go wrong.
After assessment regarding all the individual factors, KSAT and custom ground terminal have the highest overall quality. However, having a custom ground terminal will minimize our risk, and therefore is the best choice we have.
Are these unattended ground terminals, or do you have personnel who have to monitor and maintain the ground terminal?
We do need and have personnel to manage the ground terminal.
and did you roll those personnel costs into your operations expenses?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
What level are you expecting this ground crew to be at? Highly technical, or is it just a maintenance type level?
Some will be technical, maybe a couple, but then majority of it will be maintenance.
And how are you getting those technical staff in the location you've chosen for your mission operations center?
Well, we can hire them on the spot. I mean, there are a lot of technical people and maintenance people available here at Colorado Springs. And we can always fly the technicals and the maintenance people into the area of the ground terminals.
And what workforce are you going to be pulling from in Colorado Springs?
We assume Colorado Springs would be a good location for MOC because of the Air Force and its prestigious education. We figure there'd be a lot of individuals that are capable to fill our roles in this control center.
Are the rates going to be high or low?
The rates in Colorado Springs will be relatively low.
Seeing as it's a tier 3 location.
So this is a complete chart of every trade that we went through. The space segment had the most trades to determine, but we had 3 different phases. We had the initial test phase, which was a 12-month deadline. We have the initial operations, which is a 3-year deadline, and then final operations, which is a 5-year deadline. For the test operations, we needed a proof of concept. This begins with the CEO requested that since we are a relatively new team and an established company, that she would like a proof of concept, so she gave us permission to run this simulation. So we decided 5 nanosatellites in low Earth orbit. It's the cheapest orbit, cheapest satellite, and the Arctic payload, which is a European payload, is from the TU Delft, Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands. And combined, we were able to prove with 5 satellites, accounting for redundancy in case one fails, that our technology will work. So that was our decision. And as mentioned by Michael, the NanoRack solution will be how we get these into launch. We can do it for about $100,000 in launch, which is extremely cheap. And NanoRacks is established and they have a good history, and we're confident that they'll be able to deliver our payloads. Moving on to the ILC, the initial requirements stated that we needed complete coverage of North America, extending from the North Shore of Alaska all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So in order to do that, the logical option was a geosynchronous satellite. It would give us 24-hour coverage of North America and is able to view up to 1/3 of the globe at any given time. In order to go along with that, we used a chirp sensor. Chirp is an IR sensor that is used by the military to detect rocket launches. Now, the IR signature for rocket launches and well flares are relatively similar, so we were able to successfully repurpose the chirp sensor for our needs. And the problem with the chirp sensor, though, is that it doesn't have the best resolution from such a far distance. So in order to capitalize on that, we are using a mid-sized low Earth orbit satellite with a custom sensor. Now, the custom sensor will be able to meet all of the requirements that your company has set for us. We initially had a list of options that we were going through, but no single option was, in our opinion, qualified for the job, so we're building a custom one. And additionally, the low Earth orbit satellite will be able to see higher elevations, or longitudes rather. It'll be able to see past the North Shore of Alaska, and a better image of that, as well as further south into South America for future operations. In order to get these to orbit, the geosynchronous satellite required a two-stage rocket. If you recall from our trade analysis of the rockets we had, the Falcon 9 was the best option. It was cheap compared to the other one, and some of you might believe that the reliability is yet to be proven. However, so far the Falcon 9 has the same success rate getting payloads to geosynchronous orbit as the Saturn V rocket did in terms of pollen missions into space.
Just to clear something up, I don't want you guys to have the wrong impression, but the Vega and the Minotaur rockets are multi-stage rockets too. They just are much less capable than the bigger vehicles. Proton is a 4-stage, Minotaur is a 4-stage, but a Minotaur can't put anywhere near the payload up that a Proton can. So the distinction there is small launch vehicles for small, usually low Earth orbiting satellites versus the big guys that can take stuff out of the geo.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
As for low Earth orbits, we are using a Minotaur. So the Minotaur is an American, actually both these rockets are American, but the Minotaur is military. As of right now, it hasn't been cleared for civilian use, but we have contacts deep within the military, and we believe that we can have an exception made to get our payloads into low Earth orbit.
And if that doesn't work out, what's your backup plan?
I'd like to talk to the client.
So if our Minotaur doesn't work, which would be one of the more reliable rockets we're working with, we would reassess our options and find another alternative to get our payloads, get your payloads up to LEO in a timely manner.
I'm puzzled by the operational control terminal, ground terminal in the North Pole. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you plan to deploy such a system?
Sure, Armand is the lead on the ground team, he'd be happy to tell you about that.
For final operation, we plan to deploy the ground terminals in the North Pole and South America to extend to take into account the geosatellites that we'll add into the system later on. Logistically, it may be difficult, but it helps with the resolution and the communication between the satellites later on.
I might recommend looking at something like Thule or some other established base. I don't think we mean 0 degrees North Pole. I think we mean Northern Hemisphere, right?
We do mean Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Close to the North Pole.
I'd like to suggest you consider a existing ground site. Logistics going to the North Pole will be further demanding.
All right, we know
So
that.
I think you can get almost 99% same coverage, maybe a little lower latitude.
Svalbard, north of Norway, is about 82 degrees north. They have good ground stations, probably rent some space from those guys.
Did you guys trade out renting and leasing space from any of the commercial vendors?
No, we decided the ground terminal would be the best option.
So we did trade.
Who did you trade? Which ground terminal providers did you trade?
We looked briefly into Troll as an option, as well as the, I always have trouble pronouncing it.
Svalbard?
Yeah.
And which companies?
I'm not exactly sure which companies that our ground team looked into for commercially hosting our ground terminals, but I trust them. They're very experienced in their field, so they come up with the right decision for these requirements that we have to meet for this proposal.
I believe one may have been USN, if I remember the acronym correct, but that was one of our options.
All right. Moving on, oh, sorry, that was actually not. Yeah, moving on to final operations, we require a global coverage, so extending the network that we have now and making it global. So In order to do that, we require 2 more additional geosynchronous satellites. In order, if you have one that can envision 1/3 of the globe at any time, we logically assume that we logically calculated that you need 3 for global coverage.
Just as a point of reference, a geosatellite cannot communicate with the North Pole.
Yeah, that's what the lower orbit satellites are for. So the geosatellites are for detecting well flares, and then the lower satellites will come in and actually give us the data that we're going to use, and they can't communicate with the North Pole.
There's also an array of ground terminals throughout the world. For FOC, we've been talking about putting one in Alice Springs, Australia, and just having a communication network set up through these ground terminals that aren't necessarily manned by, that's not the same as a mission operations center, it's just a satellite that we can then communicate that information to the mission and payload operations centers.
Ms. Bigginsworth had asked the team to consider an Australian ground terminal location because of our political stance with Australia right now and our expansion into that market.
And the italicized option at the bottom is an optional increase in performance. We have looked into it, and all of our budgets that we'll talk about later have these included in it, just as a point of reference. And as for getting these to orbit, since they are similar satellites, or a similar system to the initial operation, we'll be using the same solutions to get them to orbit.
So we ran through some of the trades, we showed you some of those, or most of those. And we came up with a couple deliverables for IOC. So we definitely, for the showcase, will have a payload facility in London, which can be at the showcase and be used for the showcase. And we have a 3% chance of not getting this, but most likely we will get a nano satellite giving us real-time data to send to the payload facility for the showcase. We also have a backup for that, the DMSP. We can grab data from that if none of the nanosats make it through. We also will have communications for the well sites in North and South America from a geosat. And that will also give us 24/7 coverage, low resolution or lower resolution coverage of both continents. Our LEO satellite, which will have 1 for IOC, will give us high resolution coverage up to 10 miles. Up to 5 miles, 10 miles spread for the well sites. For FOC, this operational capabilities of the system will remain relatively unchanged, but we're just extending coverage to the entire globe. So we add 2 more geosats and 2 more LEOs to get us high resolution coverage.
All right, so now I just want to give us an operational view of our whole system. So we'll walk from the construction of our satellite here in our satellite factory in Seattle, Washington. And then we'll bring this through a transport company that we'll rent out. And we'll bring our satellites to our launch sites, one in California and one in Florida. The one in California will be used for our LEO orbits that we have in Vandenberg. The LEO orbits will be sent out of the Kennedy Space Center. So once we get up there, our launch vehicles will get our satellites up into our orbits, and they'll all be talking to a ground terminal, which will then be relaying data both to our mission operation control center and our backup mission operation control center. So our backup MOC also works as our payload operation center. So here on this graph, our green arrows are our primary lines of communication. So our MOC will be handling all information coming down from the satellite, dealing with telemetry. It will also be doing the commands to the satellite.
Could you stand on the other side of the screen?
Sure. So our green are our primaries, and if our MOC happens to go down, which is very unlikely, we're planning on having 98% coverage by our MOC, then all operations will be taken over by our backup one. And our blue lines of communication show that interaction between them. So also coming down from our satellites, when our payloads take data, they'll be going to our POC, which will be in London at your Green Gas Coast corporate headquarters. So
is that the reason the backup MOC is put in London? It seems a little strange to have that over the horizon from your system.
We thought for initially when we were getting it set up and we're putting things up into orbit, we wanted to be able to cover in both daytime so we wanted a difference of time zones when we're getting things operational.
And did you have any requirements for your customer to explicitly put it in London?
We thought it would be really great for your showcase. It'll be wonderful if you have a really strong operations center there for the payload data coming down, so you'll be able to showcase that really great at the oil conference in 12 months.
And I believe that the color of money, the funding was capital assets, and the dedicated capital assets could only be used on an existing facility.
Two questions. The crew size that you're monitoring upon, what do you expect to have your crew size there for? Just be running 24/7, I assume, right?
Indeed, yeah. I would refer that over to our ground team. What are you thinking for how many people we would need to run both our mock and our call?
We expect roughly around 20 to 30 depending.
Okay.
Is that 24/7 or is that?
24/7, so 20 to 30 people, not necessarily on staff 24/7, but 20 to 30 people in a given in a given operation center, operating over that 24/7 period.
So you have 40 to 60?
Yes.
Well, the Mission Operations Center will be operational 24/7 because we need to be able to communicate with our satellites at any time, make maneuvers, things like that. But the Payload Operations Center, we only downlink the data when we actually want to. It's not a continuous stream of data coming down from the satellites to the Payload Operations Center. So we don't necessarily need the Payload Operations Center to be fully staffed all the time.
So if I do some quick math right there, that says about $8.5 million per year to man those two stations.
Yes.
How much are you charging us?
You tend to.
10 million.
And that includes maintenance.
That, yeah, there's some extra costs in there for maintenance of the ground stations.
And your backup, so your backup ops center is a cold backup, you won't have it staffed up to take over the functionality of the mock if it goes down?
It will be able to have functionality. This will be responsible for backup commands, so in the instance that the mock goes down, these blue lines of communication will be able to send up backup commands and make sure that this is stable.
So you do have to
With
staff
So
that.
the staff.
So they're both staffed fully all the time, or they're not both staffed fully all the time? One of those two.
The Mission Operations Center will be fully staffed all the time.
Okay.
The Payload Operations Center will be less staffed than the Mission Operations Center, but the backup Mission Operations Center will have very few people unless the main Mission Operations Center in Colorado Springs shuts down, in which case it will be fully staffed.
And how long will it take you to get the crew there?
It should take less than 24 hours.
Yes.
We've also built safeguards into the satellites that they'll be able to operate on their own for up to 72 hours, which just gives us enough, like more than enough leeway to get up with them.
I see linked here a lot of scheduling and maintenance software. Have you considered what software you'll be using for control as well as for orbit maintenance as well as scheduling your crews? Are you going to be using CUT software? Are you going to build your own software?
We will look at CUT software for that.
Good.
So our first stage of system deployment will be for the showcase. For the showcase, we will have the Payload Operations Center online and available within 12 months. We've even thrown some fireworks for the showcase as well. The Payload Operations Center will receive data from the 5 nanosatellites that we will launch off. However, there's a risk that these 5 nanosatellites may not actually make it to orbit. So in the case of the 5 nanosatellites not making it, we will receive data from a defense meteorological satellite.
What's the probability of success for a nanosatellite right now?
It's about 50%.
Oh, wow.
Well,
That's why
if you're going up to the ISS, and they don't make the orbit, that means people are probably die. So I think the probability of getting to orbit is high. The probability of operating once in orbit is a different matter for nanosats.
So for nanosats, it's 50%. And just in case all 5 don't work, we can always receive data from a defense meteorological satellite.
So we'll still be able to do something in that big showcase.
Absolutely. You will have a fantastic showcase regardless of whatever happens to the nanosatellites.
Do you need any permissions to receive the data from the defense meteorology?
Yes. We've already received permission just in case that our nanosatellites do not work.
So your receivers at that site can receive either the signals coming from your nanosats or the same bandwidth, frequency bands from the EMSBs?
Yes, we can.
So our first deployment, like we've already talked about, is deploying the nanosatellites. We're gonna deploy them in a staggered fashion. As we talked about already, there's a high risk of them not working, so we'll have 5 up. They are scheduled, not scheduled, they're designed to last less than a year. So we need to schedule them, or stagger the launches so that they can be operational for a full year and be operational in 12 months when we have the showcase. The nanosatellites will receive information from the GPS so that they know where they are in orbit, and they will monitor well flare sites and communicate with the MOC through the ground terminals. There'll also be a ground terminal at the MOC. The next step is we're going to send up a geosynchronous satellite, which will have communications in North and South America. It'll have military-grade chirp technology sensing consistently 24/7 throughout North America. And the low Earth orbit satellite will have the custom payload design on there. It will monitor more accurately, especially the northern sites, all the sites completely, and they'll work in tangent to create a more high-resolution picture for North America right now, and eventually the world. The mid-LEO satellite will also be able to monitor the world, just much less frequently. That's it. Oh, sorry. The data, we keep talking about how we'll have real-time data for the showcase in 12 months, but that's not entirely true. We don't have a consistent conversation with satellites about what kind of well flares they're seeing. We can download whenever they want because all they have to do is go through the ground terminals, which we have an array of throughout the world. But we plan on at least being able to see them 8 times a day. So 8 times a day you can receive as much data as you want, or as much data as it has collected from these well sites.
That array of ground terminals, which you keep speaking of, has me concerned in terms of ops cost. Do you have an estimate number of ground terminals?
So there should be 5. We have one at Colorado Springs at the main mission control center. We have one at our POC, backup MOC in London. We have one in a higher latitude, like in Norway, say. One in Alice Springs in Australia, and one in South America for the operations there.
And again, these don't need to be manned, they just need to be maintained.
In your ground trace, did you do any cost of dollars to get down one image?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
And what was the most cost-effective solution?
The most cost-effective solution was the custom ground terminal or the KSAT in USM.
Okay, so the commercial option was good as well?
Commercial options were good as well. However, there is a likelihood that the commercial option could drop us because we're not exactly always on top of the list. So there's a risk that we might get dropped when we need communications.
In addition to the benefits of using the ground terminals is our communication capabilities from our geosync satellite. We'll be able to use these ground terminals for communicating with the satellite and communicating from North America to South America and throughout those.
So is that why you need the Brazilian terminal or the South American terminal?
That's a big part of it, yeah. In addition to having a southern latitude downlink station.
You have a limited amount of storage on board for imagery, you're storing and forwarding data.
Right, so we store and dump. So we load it up, we take as much as you want I think we can probably, if we have, it has safety mode where it can be out of communication for 72 hours. So it will also be able to store enough data that it will collect for at least 72 hours as well, on average. And you can always stop imaging or.
So it doesn't, not as much as you want, it has a finite.
It does
amount.
It does have a finite,
Finite capacity, yeah.
but we expect that you'll want the data more frequently than it will fill up with space.
Can I ask a question about your launch schedules for the nanosats? When are those scheduled and how soon do you know productivity, if they fail during your?
So we have 2 going up within 6 months. That was the first 2. First launch, we have 2 going up, so we want one up right away so we can start analyzing the data and see what happens. You'll be able to tell if it's initialized correctly within I believe it's a few hours, might be a day, and we should be able to downlink the data and analyze that within 3 days.
Okay, and then when's the second?
And then they stagger evenly throughout. We'll actually talk about this in our schedule, but staggered
Oh,
mechanism
sorry.
throughout the first
Yeah,
12 months.
yeah, so no, great question, we're right about to talk about it. So here we have a schedule of all the different.
One other point, and this isn't related to the story you're telling, but some people are concerned, and Eric will be surprised that I will mention this, but concerned with using the term manning and manpower. In our industry, we switch, we say FTE, which is a full-time equivalent person. You can say crew, there's lots of words you can use, but there is some sensitivity to manning and manpower in the industry now.
Great, so now we're gonna walk through our schedule, so if you guys want, feel free to take out your large sheet, which is the colored one, which is an equivalent of these, but you can take a closer look if you'd like to. So, here we have broken up into quarters of each year. So from contract, which is starting now in the first quarter of 2015, this is our 1 year timeline. So for our showcase, which will be in late January of 2016, we will have these 2 satellites up. We're gonna launch 2 at once first, and make sure that we have one up there for that showcase. And then when we go to the next slide, we'll see that the staggered launches occur. So here we have the green as development, and then our blues are implementation. So we will be launching our satellites during blues. The launch dates are also addressed here in black. So we can see that in this initial stage, right when we sign the contract, if that is what you please, then we will begin development phases of a lot of our infrastructure, including all of our ground terminals and our POC and MOC. Our POC will be functional for our showcase as well. And in addition, we're going to be starting to develop our ComSat with our Chirp-1 payload for the persistent geo coverage that will be introduced in IOC. Go to that slide. Great, and so now, here we are with the showcase. We'll have the satellites up, and here are our staggered launches. So the NASA hosted on the nano racks correspond to each of these additional blue implementation steps. So here we have our MOC functioning, everything will be, or our POC functioning rather, and everything will be in place for that showcase. And here on our final step is when we reach our IOC capability.
Where are you flying the nanosats from?
Where are we flying them from?
Yeah.
We're going to have them be controlled by the POC.
Oh.
And the backup MOC capabilities should be in place by then.
So we don't have to buy the Colorado Springs facility until after the media event?
We'll begin development of the facility, but it won't be fully operational at the time of the showcase.
Those initial launches, do you expect an increase of FTEs to cover the initial launch and checkouts, or is this going to be pretty automated and standardized?
We think that nanoracks will take care of most of our launching capabilities, and once we initialize, we will have people at our POC through the development phase and right when that initialization step occurs in order to make sure that those satellites are all set to go.
So you're not expecting a large surge of FTEs in an initial launch phase?
We'll bring on more people just for that phase, make sure we have everything, all the data secured. All right, and so let's go to the next one. So now here is our phase up to our final operational capability. So we'll be launching at the end 2 Falcons, one to bring our additional 2 GeoSats with our comm terminals on them as well, and also our 2 LeoSats. So by FOC, we'll have full global persistent coverage by the GeoSats, and then we'll also have the high resolution shots from the LEO custom sensors. And so here we can see that everything is fully operational for this entire extent. All ground terminals in both our POC and our MOC will be functioning.
And the FOC capabilities, so we have this as an extended option to extend capabilities of the system. So within 6 months, or before 6 months of the IOC completion, when it's fully operational in North and South America, then I'll have you guys give us a go or no-go on the FOC capabilities of the system.
When will you need that?
6 months before IOC.
6 months before you achieve IOC?
Yeah.
And will we would have to replenish the population in any way, or?
Yeah, so on your sheet there should be some satellite replenishing. The LEO satellites have an estimated lifespan of about 7 years. So we'll have to replace a couple of those over the course of the system, life of the system, which is, we planned it out to about 2040, which is when Ms. Biggingsworth was thinking she wanted.
Okay.
Are you going to have a forced deorbiting, or are you going to let them naturally deorbit?
The LEOs will have to be deorbited. The GEOs will go to a graveyard orbit after their operational life.
Can you go back 1 slide just for a second? Okay, thank you. One of the things you should worry about with your ground stations smeared around the globe is frequency authorizations. That's a long and arduous process.
We'll keep that in mind. Thank you for stepping in.
So as far as budget prices, our team believes you have a very clear understanding of the budget we've been allotted by your company. In total, it's $895 million US. That's now your dollars, and it's not adjusted for inflation. But if we were to break it down, I would like to, just so there's no confusion between us and you. We received $200 million upfront from Ms. Bigginsworth for the development of the system. That was our initial cost, and then for the ground infrastructure, Mr. Cox was generous enough to supply us with $100 million, and we've been able to fit all of our ground stations in that budget. He also gave us $240 million additional under the condition that we use his existing ground terminal station with a new developed, more advanced comms relay. And so that was his 10-year budget was $240 million, but he was able to forward all of that to first year for us, for our needs. A couple months ago, we were informed that his budget has been doubled, which gave us an additional $240 million to work with for our system. And Mr. Albert provided $100 million for launch, so we can make sure our system works well.
Is that for IOC or FOC?
This is for IOC. Moving on to how the money has been distributed. The nanosatellites as a whole, just the test phase, is only $6 million in total, which is less than 1% of the budget, so I don't feel the need to go into that as heavily as some of the other subjects. But the low Earth orbit satellite has a relatively cheap bus, only $41 million, and the payload is also relatively cheap, just the actual container, but the sensor itself is custom. So that requires a lot of development money, and we analyzed about we assumed it would be about $100 to $200 million before we started the project, and it ended up coming out to about $168 million to develop the sensor fully.
How precisely do you know that $168 million?
We have talked with all of our suppliers, and so we've gotten quotes for all of them. So as of right now, this is completely accurate.
And what level were those quotes? Were those quotes ROM costs or RFI requests or RFPs? Full proposals? Good.
And launch on the Minotaur satellite would be about $41 million for this. And for the geo satellites, they have to go further, they're larger, they have more technical requirements, so they're going to cost a bit more money. The bus is $170 million, and the payload is $126 million, but there's no development required because the chirp sensor has already been tested and proven, so we don't need to invest anything in that. And after the cost for CEPM, which is Systems Engineering and Project Management, our total comes to $962 million, which is about $70 million over budget. But we are confident enough in our system that we are going to, if you give us the right suit, we would like to host additional payloads on our rocket, because the payloads that we have now are far under the maximum limits for both the Falcon 9 and the Minotaur. So we're confident that we can get $60 million from third parties to host their payloads, which means that you would only have to pay $902 million for IOC, which is only $7 million above budget, and we believe that's very reasonable. And after this, we are confident we can negotiate some terms for this.
I'm a little concerned here. I had not realized you're going to host a third party on my satellite launch. What kind of guarantee am I going to have that my payload comes number one?
So in dealing with these third parties, we are going to make it absolutely clear that green gas code payload is the top priority. And so if we're guaranteeing that your satellite and your payload will get to space.
So are they getting any extra redundancy or any sort of greater demand on a bus than what we're asking for?
No. You guys are getting the highest priority.
And how are you managing the risk for us?
So we're going with a fixed price on the IOC, so aside from development costs, we absorb all the risk from this host payload.
Okay, I like that. What are you thinking on the development phase?
So the development phase, we're hoping to negotiate a cost type agreement, so that we're not exactly sure how much the development phase for the sensors will cost, we have a pretty good estimate, but it's meeting your technical requirements. We're hoping you guys would share the risk with us. I don't think it is much risk. We have a strong development team in place. They've been together for many years. They know what they're doing.
So you're asking us to write 2 separate contracts?
Correct.
So if this third hosted payload runs behind schedule, are you gonna drop it and still make our schedule?
So our plan is to have multiple potential clients in case that does happen. If one falls behind, we're gonna have other clients that can step up to the plate.
So I'll guarantee that our schedule will be.
Your schedule will not be delayed.
We'll write it into the contract we have with them. They mostly want it for a cheaper launch. So they would pay 60 million, whereas the launch would be 76 million. So they're looking at a cheaper price point, but we'll make sure your schedule is rock solid and won't change.
We have strong enough heritage. We believe that there won't be any issue finding a compatible host. Or yeah, we'll be a host, and we'll find a compatible payload to host with.
So moving on to FOC, we have not received an official budget because we have not determined whether or not this is something that your company would like. But if I were to give you an estimate, our plan is for 2 additional geosynchronous satellites and 2 additional low Earth orbit satellites if your company desires for additional performance, but I have the numbers factored in here. And so the 2 geosynchronous satellites will cost $234 million, and we'll be using a chirp satellite, or a chirp sensor as well. However, this is going to be the new version of the chirp sensor, and so we've invested $173 million into that company to make sure the development is accelerated and that it fits your schedule for 5 years.
What technology needs to be added to that? I thought you said it was rock solid military grade technology that works perfectly.
So, Chirp is off the shelf has been built and tested thoroughly, so we know it will work. So that's why we're putting that on our first GeoSat up. But it only is able to observe about a quarter of the globe as opposed to the full capability of a geosatellite, which is about a third. So in order to have full global coverage, we need to upgrade the capabilities of the sensor to be able to see the full globe.
Are you adding that chirp on a gimbal? Are you going to be able to, how are you going to search the 4 quadrants with that one sensor?
Well, there's an array of geosynchronous satellites. So we have the one that we put up during IOC, and we hope to have 2 more up. So we should be able to cover all the continents at least.
Because I understand that each one only covers 1/4 of the third of the Earth.
The current Chirp version covers a quarter. The new version, Chirp 2.0, we're calling it, we'll be able to cover a third of the globe on the GeoSat.
Okay, gotcha.
So we'll have the full coverage.
So you have, say, 4 steering sensors or something like that to make it so you can see the whole thing all at once?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you're tripling the amount of data throughput your POC and your MOC to get to FOC. And you're tripling the amount of the globe that you're monitoring, but you're not adding any manpower to the MOC or the POC. I find that extremely hard to believe.
So for the POC, since the data is not being continuously downlinked, like was mentioned earlier, we won't need an increase in manpower because all we need is, we just need an employee there who can download the information. However, the MOC will have to have an increase.
So is this a bandwidth problem or an FTE problem you're looking at here? Or the
I'd say
strip?
FTE, I don't think the bandwidth would be a big deal.
Yeah, we should.
There ought to be some ground costs in here, I think you're right. Is this a firm price for us right now, or are you ready to sign up to this today?
We just got deep.
Yeah. This is pretty sweet.
This is pretty far down the line, and this is Bacon Reserve is talking about making the FOC into almost a new business set for you guys. So you would have more capabilities, and you would be able to lease this information out to other companies, and then be reliant on your company for this information that could be integral in legislation in the future. So this is not a fixed price. This is something that we can negotiate with. We can negotiate the capabilities of the system, and we obviously need to put more thought into our ground segments as well.
We also, for the payload center, it's going to be doing some data analysis. We assume that you might be sharing this data with the EPA or the ESA in the future, or maybe other companies if you desire. So we'll need to build up some software to analyze the data and make it in a presentable format. So that hopefully will help with the data throughput that we'll get from the additional satellites.
It sounds like there's still some work to be done this week, to come back with you with some firm requirements.
Yeah, once again, this is a 5-year deadline, so these are just estimates as of right now. There's nothing, we don't have any, as our plans are not as firm as they are for IOC, because that's a much closer deadline for us.
If I review the proposal, it doesn't even look like we asked for all the details on FOC. So I appreciate you guys going above and beyond and giving us some raw estimates. This is helpful. Thank you.
We're just continuing on for the lower orbit satellites. We'll be using the same sensor and the same bus, so we don't need to invest anything into making a custom sensor this time. And so the prices will be a bit lower for this. The launch will be the same as the previous Falcon 9 and the Minotaur. And after all is said and done, including the seatbelt, it'll come out to a grand total of $1.29 billion. And if you would like, we're prepared to offer a hosting option again to reduce your cost by $30 million.
So you're going to reduce by $60 million on one launch and only $30 million on how many more launches of this one?
So the launches for FOC are actually pretty booked, because we have 2 satellites going out for each launch instead of 1. We have, however, extra weight capacity on the Falcon 9 for the low Earth orbit. So we're selling, instead of selling a hosted payload, we're just hosting cargo to orbit.
Additionally, FOC is a much more important milestone if you choose to do it, and so we want to minimize the risk of sending out the third parties, so we're having a group being a bit more conservative with this.
I see. Okay. Seems like that $30 million discount in the grand scheme of things, $1.3 billion. Maybe we'll just have you erase that and we'll put it on our side.
I'm gonna apply that to the ground costs.
And double it.
So, in our operation, there are risks, and these are our 5 largest risks that we have determined. The worst possible scenario would be that we would have a launch vehicle failure, so our rocket would not successfully make it into orbit. And our risk mitigation for this is that we get insurance for the rocket and our payload. So should anything go wrong, we will have monetary compensation, but we will still have a schedule delay. Aside from the launch vehicle
You guys
failure,
are paying for that insurance?
Yes, that is your budget.
It's actually not in our budget. We'll offer you a range of insurance rates. We're thinking 12% for out of Kennedy Space Center, because that's a more reliable launch site. But out of Vandenberg, we'll maybe think about 15%.
Of course, 15% of the entire program cost we need to add in to our side before we make a decision. Okay. Thanks.
in addition to launch vehicle failure, sensor development cost is also a large risk, but not as large as launch vehicle failure. To mitigate this risk, we'll finish our critical design review as early as possible. Aside from that, we have potential ground terminal failure. For that, we have a backup missions operations center. So the ground terminal failure or the mission operations center in Colorado Springs fails, we can operate the backup mock in London.
Is there any special software or hardware you're looking or anticipating for that ground site? Are you developing any particular specialized software?
Not necessarily specialized, but we will be getting off-the-shelf software to monitor.
There's always a risk somehow on any program ever. Even if you don't really think you're going to develop any software, it ought to be a risk. And I don't know why. It just is.
I think these guys might know why. You guys know why software is a risk?
Well, sometimes when you move things from Google Docs to PowerPoint,
I'm concerned about the sensor development. It's all of this is a pretty rosy picture, assuming everything comes in at least in time and more or less on budget. But having been involved in sensor development, I know that's hard to do. And do you have some sort of backup sensors, cameras, whatever, that are already proven and working that you could slip in that would be somewhat not as good as what you hope to produce, but still would do the job?
So, great question. Our geosat is actually using a chirp sensor, which is tested, like we said, at least the first geosat. So that one we're not so worried about like getting everything to work properly. For the low Earth orbit satellite, that's actually, we looked at a number of current options that we didn't have to put in development costs, but none of them reached really what we wanted.
Can you
So-
describe some of those options for Dr. Hill?
So it's actually a very long list of options, and after the presentation, if you'd like, we can sit down with you and go over it in detail.
So yeah, but so there are some options that could give us something. For LEO, we were hoping to get our custom satellite in, and also if it really comes down to it and we have issues with the sensor development, we can push out launch for just the LEO satellites and have still have full persistent coverage, but just not have quite the resolution that we want. The other option would be, of course, to like downgrade to a different satellite or a different sensor that's already been built, and we can show you those options after.
Would you be willing to consider penalty payments if you don't make these projected targets?
Yeah, so this is, development costs are gonna be, cost tight. So we'll kind of negotiate with you and figure out the best way to do that. We're gonna get through CDR as quickly as possible, which is the critical design review for the sensor. And that way we can kind of predict, once we have the CDR, we should be able to predict accurately predict the cost and the timeline.
So
to get
which
that ready.
kind of cost type would that be? Would that be cost plus incentive fee or cost plus fixed fee?
I think it'd be a cost plus incentive fee, because we know you guys are on a tight schedule, or at least want to be on a tight schedule and be on cutting it on the front edge of this new technology. So we understand you want it to be done quickly and effectively, so we'll absorb some of that risk.
So how much of your profit would you be willing to put to the incentive? What percent? All of it. And what would that be?
I'm not.
Well, since we're sharing the risk, I think you ought to be sharing what profit you're getting on that part of the contract, so are you willing to share that with us?
I believe on the development side of the profit, we are anticipating a 12% profit, which is a little, just about what we need to stay in business. So
So if we were to put that 12% all into incentive fee payments, would you be comfortable signing up to the program?
12% is a little high. I'm sure we can negotiate that there.
Interesting. Okay.
Can I ask a question about this risk matrix?
Sure.
Where in the timeline does this fall? If you could pinpoint timeline for this, we're looking at this, where?
This is essentially for different cases in the timeline. So the launch vehicle failure is primarily these are primarily for IOC, but the payload operations center failure is from the showcase to the IOC.